Here we go.
Heavenly Father, Lord, we ask for grace and mercy. I think about the things when it comes to singing. For one, I know I have no voice, and we need the one strong voice here. And we just ask your forgiveness, Father, as we stumble sometimes through the songs. And we enjoy them, Lord, and we don't want to dishonor you. So please, Lord, forgive us as we continue to go through the next study, Lord. We ask for your presence to be with us as we go through Daniel 11:40, Father, and compare and contrast the two verses. We pray that you would bless each and every one of us with a greater understanding. We're thankful, Father, for the work that you have given this group to do, and not just us here physically, but those that are joining us online, because many participate in the work of putting together notes and presenting and learning to present. And we are just so thankful, Lord, because it was you that drove us in this direction. And without you, we might ourselves be very behind. We have been so blessed in learning to teach and learning to put together the notes. We've been so blessed to better understand the message and in doing it this way, Father. We are thankful. So we pray as we open up this next study, Father, that we would have not just a better understanding of Daniel 11, comparing and contrasting, but understanding the concept of compare and contrast and how it gives us information that's actually not there when we're putting things out on a balance in a scale and having them both balanced on equally on each side, that it is your way of speaking to us. And it is proven over and over again. And in doing so, Lord, we see that no human could have devised this, that it had to come from divinity. So I pray that our hearts be humbled before you, Lord, and that we be eager and thirsty and hungry through this next study. We praise you and we thank you and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
We're very sorry. Maybe Adriana can explain what happened, but I did lose it. So
if anyone starts feeling the tingle at any point, just turn around and hide it or something.
Yeah.
I just can't get it in my eye vision because it's contagious.
I struggle because I need her strong voice when I sing, and she was yawning. So, and then somebody else.
Well,
so
me,
we're sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. For me, I began to laugh because it was just like, man, And then I try to control it and get it back, but once I start, I can't control it until it's done.
I don't know why this happens, but when I have to speak, like last night, every time I have to do a presentation and speak for long periods of time or sing, I get really yawny. I don't know why this is happening. My lungs are like, stop it or
No
something.
problem. No problem. I'll just turn and walk away because I have the same problem with laughing too. And I feel bad. So, it all went quiet, and I apologize.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I'll be right back.
The weirdest thing was that we could still hear the music, just not your voices. So that part didn't make sense at all.
Oh, so you never heard the laughter? I walked away.
No, because the music was louder. I knew that was going to happen.
Oh.
So you guys got to sing and hear your own voice.
Oh, good. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Okay, so we're going into, like I said in the prayer, Daniel 11:40, and compare and contrast. And an open discussion. Somebody else will have to watch. You're going to watch the Zoom chat for me? Okay. And so if you have questions, go ahead and interrupt as well, or put it in the chat. And Victoria's going to watch the chat. So these are going through, I think there's 15 total. So this was there 5 more concluding today then. And this is Daniel 11:40. And in the Guadalupe presentations, unlike the Brazil was what, 46 classes, right? And that took us almost, well, not quite a year. It took us from, I believe we started in April, and it took us until just right around November. I think did we finish them before November 9th or right after? I think it was right around the same time.
I think it was a little before.
So there's more detail in Brazil, and all of those notes. I know Sister Anna's here, so I think I sent her the link just in case. But all of those notes are posted on the Repairers of the Breach website. And then what I've been doing with the Guadalupe ones is also, if you go to the Repairers of the Breach website, I posted, I've taken each one of the slides and turned it into an image and posted it as a slideshow on the Repairers of the Breach website. If you look under Bible studies in Midnight Cry. So, and I'll probably add the World War III presentation that I'm going to do in March as well, because that's kind of needs to be added to it. So anyway, so it's there for anybody that wants to study. The notes can be downloaded, or you can just watch the slideshows either way. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so this first part is just a little bit of review. So the line looks pretty familiar to us from what we've been studying. We discussed the 4 battles and the 3 histories that we've also been overlaying. And those 3 histories were Pyrrhus in 2 parts, Macedonia and Italy, and then also World War II. So if we remember, I was trying to go back and find a note slide to put it in this particular slide just for a refresher, but we had Pyrrhus in Macedonia, Pyrrhus in Italy, then we have World War II, then we have our history. So so she's showing here these 4 battles in Pyrrhus and 2 histories, World War II. That portion is not showing here visibly. So we particularly took these 4 battles, Ipsus, Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. And the first element that we needed to see is that Ipsus is the key to understanding the others, because it is the same mode of warfare that is being used, the same method of fighting. So Ipsus is the key to understand what these messages are. And when we understand declaring the end from the beginning, it's what it is at the beginning, and we're going to touch a little bit of that history back here as well as 1989, because it was the same mode of warfare all the way through the reform line. But in this portion of our reform line, I guess the best way to say that is, and I don't think we touch on this one in this particular study, but if anybody's actually seen her lineup, 1989, I think we did it last week, 1989 to 1991, also is the same thing, is not same thing, but you would see the same thing happening here at Panium to Sunday Law. So when you see the fall of the deadly wound of the King of the South, we are going to touch on some of that, and the deadly wound of the King of the South, and then the death. So that, I think it is actually in this study. So Ipsus, though, is the key because it's the same mode of warfare and it's going to tell us what the mode of warfare is for the rest. So we discussed the 2016 election, and we noticed that in 3 different histories, you had Demetrius and Pyrrhus, you had Seleucus and Ptolemy. For those that remember where we did the Battle of Ipsus, you had Antigonus was there as well, but Demetrius was Pyrrhus was a general fighting for Demetrius. You had Seleucus and Ptolemy, another perspective of Ipsus, and then Hitler and Stalin. So in each of those, you have the King of the North and the King of the South. They always begin in an alliance. So 2016, Poland, you always have an alliance. You go back to Ipsus, they were in an alliance. They're enemies, but they were in an alliance. Here you see when they invade Poland, you see that they were enemies, and yet they were in an alliance. And that's first seen in the Battle of Ipsus. We didn't go into the history of 2016 and explain how Vladimir Putin helped Donald Trump. We did that in the previous study, and we could go back and watch the Arkansas camp meeting, or like I said, you can go to check out the Brazil, you can watch the videos. In the Repairs of the Breach, I do have a link to the playlist, but most of us by now, I think, know where to find these. And if you don't, email us and we'll let you know where to find these different presentations. So then we looked at 2018 and lined it up with 1940. So we have 2018 here and lined it up with August of 1940. When we traced that relationship between Hitler and Stalin as it broke down and then it was repaired. And late last year, we followed the same relationship. This time it's between Trump and Putin, and it broke down and it was repaired, and there were the same issues And that's referring to the study that we did. Was it last week we did Heraclea? I think it was. So in the Battle of Heraclea, you would understand the breakdown between them, what went on. And it was, and I always remember from the Brazil class and had it in the notes that she really emphasized, because Brazil and Guadeloupe were both done before November 9. They were early, January, February, March or so of 2019. So it was long before November 9, 2019. So Heraclea, the fulfillment of Heraclea, it was a period of time that happened. And she said, in order to understand what Raphia would look like, we needed to understand Heraclea. And Heraclea also we would understand here. But when it comes to the individual characteristics of, like here they're in alliance, and then here you see the alliance breakdown, it took many presentations to lay that out. So so let's see, and late last year we followed that same relationship, Trump and Putin, okay? And so they had the same issues of breaking down Trump and Putin, and also Hitler and Stalin. Just like Seleucus and Ptolemy in Daniel 11, what they are fighting over is spheres of influence. Because when it comes to world power, that's where you hold it. How you can manipulate world affairs. We understand what these two battles will teach us about Raphia. So the spheres of influence, we've gone through that somewhat too, and it's how they can manipulate world affairs. And so I don't know if anybody noticed, but in the news, the Taliban in the US just signed a peace agreement. So we see things, and that's why we need to know what's going on in that area and what the battle is over. And that's what the Ptolemy and Seleucus taught us. The original, as far as I know, the original, the first place where you see this battle in the Bible anyways. I don't know if they were always fighting over Syria prior to that. Maybe somebody has information on that. But when you go back to the first Ptolemy of the dynasty, the first Ptolemy and the first Seleucus, that later becomes the Seleucid dynasty, when you come to those first ones, and it was a battle over that Kol Syria area. So that's the same area they're fighting for today. And though we don't have wars in our own nation, Russia's not having wars in their nations, it's about spheres of influence and how they can manipulate world affairs by having a control and force within the other countries, those other nations. And we understood that issue currently began, I think it was 2009 when Obama proposed, the US proposed along with NATO, I think, building a pipeline because they wanted to have Europe not as dependent on Russian oil. They wanted Europe to be able to get their oil without having to be dependent on Russia, to be less dependent on Russia. But they would have to go through Syria. Syria said no. And in 2011, Iran, was it Iran or Iraq? There was another, maybe somebody remembers, the other pipeline that was suggested, and it came from Iraq, is that right? From Iraq through Iran, or was it Iran through Iraq, and then through Syria, and then through the Mediterranean, and that one Syria said yes to. And so I don't remember the details that that's what kicked off the Syrian war. I know that the Syrian civil war, but then in 2011 is when the Syrian civil war, the Arab Spring began. So this 10-year, we had a 10-year proxy war in the beginning. So we know by that 10-year proxy war in the beginning between the King of the North and the King of the South, that this Syrian war is a 10-year proxy war. So we can, and it's right in line with what we're seeing happening today, because 2021 would mark 10 years. And that's right in line with what we know about the King of the South receiving a deadly wound.
Now it's one
So I
question.
wandered, I apologize.
Can I say something real quick? How is the sound sounding now, Sister Christine? Can you let us know?
Yes, right now it sounds good.
Okay. When was it starting to drag? Was that early on or during the start of this presentation?
Today?
Yeah, where Sister Anna is talking to you, there's a delay.
Oh, no, she was asking if, Well, I believe that her question was, are we all supposed to open our mics while we're all
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
But I was trying to explain that, but I didn't do a very good job, that
Oh.
that only one person opens their mics and everybody keeps theirs closed. Otherwise, there's a delay in sound and then it sounds all confusing.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hey, if anybody has anything to say, they can turn their mic on and cut me off. That's
Right.
fine.
But that was while we sing together, that there should only be one mic open, only the person that's leading out in the song.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely. Okay,
So I don't think it was Iran because it's so big. It could have just gone straight through Turkey where it's at. It might have been Kuwait because Qatar was the one that the U.S. wanted to take oil from, but it might have been Kuwait.
it wasn't Kuwait. It was up north. I can see it in my
Kuwait
head,
is
I
right
just
next to
can't-
Iraq.
It was up north and right. Hold on one second. I'm gonna look at the map, guys. It was Iran. I'm pretty sure it was Iran.
But Iran
Because
can just go through Turkey.
because Iran is
Is
backed
right
by
there.
Russia.
It wouldn't need to go through Syria.
I'll have to pull up the map. Somebody can pull it up later because I have the maps on the website. We'll look at it maybe later. I'm pretty sure it was Iran because Russia supports Iran. And
It would depend where in Iran the oil was coming from.
Yeah.
yeah, because they had the natural gas resources. And so what undergirds all of these studies is the primary principle that the King of the South was defeated in 1989 to 1991. When we come back into our time period, he's fighting again. So we know that he has come back. What we want to do today is see how we can demonstrate that by taking Daniel 11:40 and treating it as a parable, doing the compare and contrast. So we'll look at Daniel 11:40. And at the time of the end, shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So Daniel 11:40 comes in two parts. We're going to see this first phrase, first sentence, where you see the king of the south defeat the king of the north. So that first phrase, the king of the south pushes or wars against the king of the north, and it pushes at the time of the end, because that's what it says, at the time of the end. The king of the south is pushing against, warring against the king of the north. If we were to go into the Great Controversy, we want to paraphrase a couple of quotes. Great Controversy 356, paragraph 2. 356, paragraph 2. She's talking about the message about the second advent, the message given by William Miller. She says, no such message has been given before. Paul couldn't teach it. The reformers couldn't teach it. Martin Luther couldn't teach it, but it could begin to be taught in 1798. She says that since 1798, the book of Daniel has been unsealed. Knowledge of prophecy is increased, and many have been sharing the message of the judgment. So in this phrase, Ellen White is saying in 1798, the book of Daniel is unsealed, and there's an increase of knowledge. We read Daniel 12:4, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. So we can see in Daniel 11:40, you have the time of the end. In Daniel 12:4, you have the time of the end. So it's talking about the same thing, and at that time, what's going to happen. So Daniel introduces the time of the end, and in Daniel 12:4, we have some information about what is going to happen at the time of the end. The book of Daniel is going to be unsealed, and knowledge will be increased. And Ellen White says that the book of Daniel was unsealed, and knowledge increased in 1798. So she gives us the year. So we have this line here, and you have 1798, where the book of Daniel is unsealed, and she's marking it as the time of the end, and knowledge will increase. And that's the first portion of Daniel 11:40. So we'll go to 18 MR, 15, paragraph 2, and cut into the middle part. She says, Daniel was unsealed at the time of the end when the first angel's message was given to the world. So we have the time of the end. The book of Daniel's unsealed. and the first angel's message arrives in history. There's an increase of knowledge, and Ellen White says that was in 1798. This is where William Miller buys a concordance and begins to study the prophecies. So we can see we're adding information. She gives us 1798. We know that Daniel was talking about the fighting against the king of the south going against the king of the north. She's marking that as 1798. And she's also marking here that it's when the first angel arrives, and she's marking that knowledge increases. And we'll go to another quote in the Great Controversy. We want to see something else that happened in 1798. This is 439,
Can I
paragraph
say
2.
something about that? Because that thought always pops up into my mind. So when we talk about the arrival of the first angel message, and so we know that the pattern that at that point that is the unsealing of a message. So yeah, bless you. So at the time of the unsealing of the message, the person doesn't know what the message is, but it's in the air.
But it's there. It's
Yeah, but
arrived.
it's there. It's arrived. So what does that really mean?
Well,
When we say the message arrived, it's in the air.
I don't know about that.
No,
but
I'm not trying to be funny. I'm
the
just
messenger is
saying.
raised up, but he doesn't have
all
the understanding.
Oh.
So like Jeff Pippinger was raised up in 1989, right?
Mhm.
And the reform line started to be taught. You started getting an increase of knowledge, then you get a formalization of the message.
Wow. So the teacher that is to be raised up doesn't know that they're the teacher yet.
No, I think you learn as you go.
Yeah.
I think all of us are learning as we go. How did Jesus
Whoa.
learn who he was?
Oh yeah. Like as he went. Yep, that's true. Sorry.
okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So Great Controversy 439, paragraph 2, she's talking about the papacy. She says that he's given power for 42 months, for 1260 years, and then what happens at the end of this period? So we have the 1260 years, it extends to 1798. Then at the end of that period, what is going to happen to the papacy? Says the prophet, I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death. And again, he that leads to captivity will go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. She says that the 42 months is the 1260, and the 1260 is the time period that the papacy was given to oppress God's people. It began in 538 and ended in 1798. And in 1798, the Pope was made captive by the French army, and the papacy received its deadly wound, fulfilling the prediction, he that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. So we mark 1798, captivity of the papacy. So we have the captivity here. And we can see she's continuing to build on this through Daniel 11:40, Daniel 12:4, through the Great Controversy 18 MR. She's building the things that happen here and how we get to here. So, and we know he had to go into captivity because for 1260 years, he led others into captivity. So he that leads into captivity must go into captivity. We call this the deadly wound. Ellen White ends this paragraph with mentioning the deadly wound and the fulfillment of the prediction. So she's connecting all these things together. He that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. And this is a direct quote from Revelation 13. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints.
Whoa. So when we go back into that history, because you remember how we know that the time of the end, 1798, it was supposed, because we know that Christ was supposed to come back in that history. And so this is like just one long line of that dispensation. But we teach 2 times of the end because Christ was supposed to come back in that time, but he didn't.
There would have only been one time.
Yeah, so in our history, this is being fulfilled. Right. Because it wasn't completely fulfilled in that history.
Because it was a line of failure.
Yeah.
They failed. They both failed their jobs.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and you'd have to go back to that Uriah Smith study that we did. to go through how he, in other videos, but the slideshow is posted if you want the slideshow, but you can go back to the video, and that was in Germany on the Finn YouTube channel, where he goes and talks about Uriah Smith, how Uriah Smith was right about what he said, and his information came from Litch. And that laying all that out shows that you cannot prove 1989 by the spirit of prophecy, which goes to the quote we read, or the statement that we read, that Jeff is saying, is that, you know, using a thus saith the Lord is spiritualism, and how they're saying that, you know, this movement is not using a thus saith the Lord. There is no thus saith the Lord for 1989.
Right, or 9/11.
Or 9/11. It is made or manufactured by using compare and contrast and using parables and line upon line.
But
Taking
not
history.
accepting that Jeff is undoing his own origin.
Right. Yeah, they're rejecting line upon line.
Well, the thing is isn't it that because they did not accept this truth, that they started as they didn't accept the truth that was coming out, the midnight cry, that their lines started to get cut.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why that they had to tear up he had to tear up his own message in order to make himself, I guess, the greater light.
So Daniel 11:40, part A, you have the king of the south pushing or warning against the king of the north. The king of the north, the papacy, goes into captivity and receives a deadly wound. We know that there's the first angel arrives here. That's when William Miller was raised up, gets his concordance, and then the knowledge is going to increase.
Wait, he doesn't get his concordance there.
I think he gets his concordance in 1798. I'm
Mhm.
pretty, huh?
Oh, it's in 1798?
I think so.
When was he born again?
Doesn't he begin his study at
Years before that,
1816?
17 years
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
1816
Yeah.
to 1818.
Thank you. I
I'm
had to-
pretty
yeah, thank
sure
you.
that he got his
18,
concordance though in 1798.
Yeah.
If I'm
okay,
wrong,
yeah.
somebody, I'll stand corrected, but I'm pretty sure he gets.
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
What? It was a Cruden's concordance, and it really wasn't
Yeah.
a concordance that gave definitions. It was a different type of concordance, one that has every word of the Bible. And then you could go look up a word in the Bible, and then what the concordance would reveal is to every place that word was used
Yeah.
in the Bible, so that you can go and trace your words.
Yeah.
And so that was the concordance that he used.
You're right. Sorry, I was thinking of his birth. It was in 1816. Yeah.
No, that was when
Sorry.
he was studied. That was the 2 years
The
he
2 years
studied.
that he studied,
Right.
1816 to 1818.
1770 something is when he was born.
Right.
Yeah.
It had to be because. Yeah.
So
Sorry.
that's okay. So Ellen White says that this event in 1798, the deadly wound, fulfilled that specification, and this is when France came against the papacy and took the Pope captive. In Daniel 11:40, what's described is the king of the north coming against the king of the south, and the king of the south coming against the king of the north. And if this is a battle, when is the war? So she's talking about these two situations here, one coming against the other coming against, and such. So it's a battle. So when did the war start? When do you see the conflict of France coming against the papacy? And we'll mark it as before, and we know that this will be the French Revolution. When you come to the waymark that is marked in prophecy, you have a series of events. So there were a series of events that had happened, and this is the French Revolution. And in this time period of the French Revolution, you have various events. The major one, though, is 1796. Then the French army and the papal army fight in an actual battle, and the papal troops were defeated. So prior to coming to the deadly wound, you have an ongoing war. So here, prior to the time of the end, prior to the deadly wound, you have an ongoing war. So multiple things she's stacking up here, one by one. You have the time of the end marked. She gives us the date of the time of the end. We know that the first angel arrives at this time of the end. We know that the papacy goes into captivity and receives a deadly wound. And we know that there's an ongoing war prior to it. So when it says in the Great Controversy that 1798 was the deadly wound and fulfilled that verse in Revelation 13, that leads into captivity, will go into captivity, That isn't the only part of the verse Ellen White mentions. If you go back in that quote in Great Controversy, she also mentions the other part. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. The first phrase of Revelation 13:10. If this is captivity, and this, so you have captivity and the deadly wound here, and the deadly wound fulfilled that, does the papacy die? And when does it die? Because to be wounded is not the same as death. Did the papacy just stay wounded since 1798? It died when? So when did the papacy die? And there's a really good quote in 8MR, and it's 354, paragraph 1. And I'm going to read the quote, and then we'll read what her commentary on it, where she is paraphrasing the quote. So that afternoon, November 2nd, Elder Bordeaux had us accompany him to the cathedral in Valence, France, and look upon the bust of Pius VI, who was noted in prophecy, who was led into captivity and died in captivity. Here was the one marked in history who received the deadly wound. His heart is encased in the marble monument beneath where the bust is located. We felt rather solemn as we looked upon the monument of this man noted in prophecy. So she's marking which pope it is. So Ellen White is traveling through France, and she comes to Valence, and she is with an Elder Bordeaux. She says that Elder Bordeaux takes her into a cathedral, and in this cathedral is a bust of Pius VI, and that this is Pius VI that is spoken of about in Bible prophecy. And where in Bible prophecy do you find Pius VI? People say you don't find Pyrrhus in the Bible, and you won't find Pius either by name, but he is noted in prophecy. To find him, you need to do a little bit of search in history, and you might need Wikipedia to help you. But if you search in that history, Pius VI was the Pope in 1798, and Ellen White says that he is the one spoken about in these prophecies. He is the one who went into captivity and died in captivity. So he went into captivity in 1798, and he died in captivity in 1799. We spoke at a previous study about the concept about a king and a kingdom, how Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, and they become inseparable. So
Can I
king and
say-
a kingdom are inseparable. Yeah.
That reminds me, Ellen G. White studied history herself. I know she did, because I don't know, I remember reading through the Great Controversy. She had to go back in history to know that, some of that information. I mean, I don't know.
They had the
entire
pioneers.
group of the
Yeah.
Millerites, they studied just like we did.
Exactly.
Even more so,
Yeah.
because they didn't have internet to have it at your fingertip, everything.
Right.
I know one of the pioneers went to Europe, in Germany, to those museums and look at those old books and stuff like that. They were, going out of ways to start.
Yeah, they did in that. They had brains and they used them. And that, I really believe that they did that. God was not just revealing information, though he was, but they did their own research too, and studying
Yeah.
too.
They did. So we're realizing that using the Bible, that a king and a kingdom are inseparable. Where Nebuchadnezzar is called the head of gold, Babylon is also the kingdom. So the king and the kingdom are inseparable. So in this history, when the Bible verse talks about the papacy, Ellen White isn't marking the papacy in this paragraph. She's marking the Pope himself. She says he is the one who went into captivity and died in captivity. Here is the one who is marked in history and receives the deadly wound. And Ellen White and her associates felt solemn as they looked at this monument of this man spoken about in prophecy. This is the story of Pius VI. He went into captivity where he received a deadly wound, and he died in captivity the following year, 1799. So we saw that he receives a deadly wound, and then he dies. And this is Daniel 11:40, part A, where the king of the south wars against the king of the north. The king of the south takes the Pope captive, and he dies in captivity. So you go into captivity and you die in captivity, and this is the completion of Revelation 13:10. He that led into captivity will go into captivity. 1799 also fulfills Revelation 13:10, where it says that he that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. So he's led into captivity in 1798, but he isn't killed. The death is actually 1799. And we can mark from 1798 to 1799 the fall. So we have the fall happening here. So the papacy has gone into captivity in 1798, and then you mark all through this history, waymark after waymark, and their experience in captivity. They lose the papal states. In 1809, the next Pope, Pius VII, is taken captive also, but all through this history, they are trodden down.
So was he, the Pope Pius VI, was he killed by the sword or just died there?
Do you mean like literally? I don't know. Look at that.
No, he died in captivity, not by
Yeah.
because of the sword wound.
Okay, just asking.
Died in captivity.
Hi,
Yeah.
Sister
Yeah,
Tony.
hi, Sister Tony.
Hi.
So yeah, he died in captivity.
But when it says by the sword, is that because it was war?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because of war, right. Did you hear that, Tony? It was because of war.
Okay, I heard it.
So
He was taken by sword point.
taken.
At sword point, if I can say that.
So just to recap, Pope Pius VI, she's noting that he is the Pope that was the one that was taken captive and then died in captivity. 1798, time of the end. So all these events are tied together.
So can we have, is she gonna go through a refresher of how they were all trodden down after that? Because I can't remember.
No, not in this study, we don't.
Okay.
There was just a quick mention of Pius VII.
Mhm.
So we'll read Revelation 17:8, excuse me. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. It's interesting. I don't think I ever noticed that.
Foundation of the book. Yeah.
They that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book. So he is specifying the ones that wonder, if I'm understanding that correctly, are the ones whose names are not written in the book of life.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen to this power? Go back to Revelation 13:3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So you can line those two verses up together,
I
right?
know. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. The ones who names were written in the book followed after the beast.
Right.
Where are you at? What verse is this?
Well, it was 13:3 and 17:8.
13:3.
I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed.
So do you think she's implying that they're the same?
Yeah. It's talking about the same event.
So that the whole world?
Huh? Oh, I'm talking about the deadly wound.
Oh, I guess I thought we were talking about
And
wonder.
then, so in Revelation 3, she says, and the world wondered after the beast. It's interesting. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and those who wonder
Because in the other one, it says, who's
are
not
not written.
written in the book.
Yeah.
I don't remember what presentation it was. I can remember where I was getting ready to go out on a walk. I can remember that part. But Parminder was talking about the world, or he's talking about the Nethinims, and making a distinction between the world and the Nethinims. And he says something along the lines of, I hope you all understand this. I think he said it after that part after. But we're talking about God's people. We're not talking about the world. We're not going to go out there and give a message to the world.
Yeah.
We're going out there to give a message to God's people. So I think that this might be where this distinction is too, where the Nethinims in the world is being seen as a distinction. The Nethinims are God's people in the world, and then you have the world.
Right, because even God makes that distinction.
Right.
Distinction when He says, "Be not of the world."
Right.
You're in the world, but be not of it.
Right.
So God's people are in the world; they're just not of it. If
Right.
that makes sense. Yeah.
So But that's talking Nethinims as well.
And wondered means admire.
Yeah, admired.
So, Elaine, is this still Berthier who took Pope Pius VI?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So is this the end of the papacy? What's going to happen? You could say the deadly wound is healed, because we see that. It says his deadly wound was healed. We saw that he, where does it say it? Was, is not, and yet is, or the deadly wound is healed, right? You could say that the deadly wound is healed, but if I'm in a pit, where am I? What is a pit? And the pit is a grave. When you go down into the pit and you go through the study of the Bible and you see what the Bible is telling you is a pit, the pit is the grave. So if it's going to ascend out of a pit, it's going to come out of a grave, which means there's a resurrection, right? It's going to resurrect in the future. It's going to come out of the pit. It was wounded, it died, and was buried. And we need to remember also that all of this is the work of the counterfeit. And it is counterfeiting the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Mhm.
And Jesus wasn't just wounded on the cross, he was wounded and he died. He resurrected, and this is the counterfeit of that. So we see that there's a resurrection, because we see that the beast that was and is not, it yet is, meaning
Whoa.
he comes back.
And that makes me think about God's people, because she's using this to help us see, you know, the papacy as a counterfeit, but God's people have to go through that too. You know,
Right.
we die and we resurrect and we come back a new creature, right?
You talking about the 144,000, or are you talking about?
Well, God's people, yeah.
Because we need to dig in. We need to start digging into 1
Yeah.
Corinthians 15 together as a group.
Yeah.
On parables. And
I'm just
and
saying,
nature.
God's people have to experience it, but yeah, especially the 144,000.
So you might confuse people if you're suggesting it's a literal death.
No, I'm
Okay.
talking about spiritual death.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is where we consider our methodology. We're going to study Daniel 11, verse 1140. Then we need to study it as a parable. And what parables can do for us is help us see information that isn't in the verse itself by using compare and contrast. Now we come to part B of Daniel 11:40. It's a different story, and we'll read that. The king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. And I have a few things in my mind that I'm able to keep straight, but I still lack a whole lot of them to keep it juggled. But because coming kind of fresh off of doing that Uriah Smith was right study, and understanding that there was never supposed to be a 1989 in all that we're seeing here. So it makes it, you have to be able to juggle those things in your head when you're understanding that 1989 should not have existed. I probably wouldn't want to say too much. I think we all followed that study when we did it.
Yeah.
Okay. And we can review it later, maybe. So let's see. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So now we come to a separate history, and that's part B. We have the time of the end here, 1798. The book of Daniel is unsealed, and we bring that down to 1989. The book of Daniel is unsealed, particularly in the verse that we're currently in, verse 40.
Whoa. So we're living in the part B? I don't know. Like, I'm like, this is all clicking in my head.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is so interesting. I mean, like, yeah, when it starts clicking in my
Part B.
sorry, I'm kind of feeling so slow, but
That's okay.
yeah.
And now we find another battle. And this now is the king of the north retaliating against the king of the south. Because the first one was the king of the south warring against the king of the north. Now we have the king of the north retaliating against the king of the south. And what we're now able to do, if we approach it as a parable, is to compare and contrast. So when we come to 1989, this is now between the Soviet Union and the United States. And if this is a battle, when is the war? So 1989, everybody remembers the Holy Alliance. We all remember the Berlin Wall coming down.
Mhm.
So if it's a battle, then let's see. It was battle. When was the war? Let's see, where did I lose my place here? We recognize that some of the people, nope, let's see, there's been an ongoing war.
No, you were right there.
I was
Sister
right
Ray.
there.
Yeah.
So when was the war? Okay. Before, and what war do we call this? There's been an ongoing war between the United States and the Soviet Union from 1945. And she says, we recognize that some people will want to mark 1947, or you can mark 1949, but she's going to start here at World War II,
At the end.
1945,
At the end.
at the end of World War II. Thank you. And there's strong logic. We've seen it in some of the other presentations that there's strong logic to mark it at 1945. And just one piece of it I know is relates to the 46, because she marks 1899 as the beginning, 1945 is the end, 46 years. So Satan parallels the 46 years of 1798 to 1844. That's one that I remember off the top of my head. So, but when you come to 1989, if we compare and contrast, we have to line it up with 1798. And in 1989, the King of the South is defeated. Here in 1989, you see the King of the South is defeated. But there's a problem.
Okay, one quick thing.
Yeah.
So that's how we come to this, the line of progression, and then this is a repeat and enlarge. So this is why we get to line up 1989 under 1798, or line them up, because this is a new history. Well, that verse is starting from here. Part B is starting from 1989, and so we're lining up those verses,
Because you
but
have,
lining up the histories. if
because
that
you have
makes
the
sense.
King of the South warring against the King of the North.
Yeah, and then you have
And
the
you have
King of the North
warring against the King of the South. And
Yeah.
prior to, there was a war.
Yeah,
And prior to, there was a war.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Wow.
So there's a problem. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, but was at the end of the Soviet Union? No. What happened in 1989 was just the beginning of a process. So if this is a deadly wound, the events of 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the elections that began to happen in Eastern Europe just mark the beginning of the process. From 1798, a deadly wound is inflicted. There's been a much larger battle or war, but its fall is inevitable because this wound is mortal. It isn't yet dead, but it's going to lead to the death in the future. So when the Berlin Wall fell, what everyone recognized was that this was the mortal wound of the Soviet Union. The fall was now inevitable, but it hadn't yet fallen. It hadn't yet died. They fell in 1991, and this is the deadly wound. This is the death. So it falls progressively from 1989 to 1991. Anybody have questions? Or are we doing okay?
There's nothing in the chat.
Okay. So in the first history, we mark a king and a kingdom, the papacy, Pius VI. So you have a king and a kingdom. When we come into this, our history here, who is the king and the kingdom? The Soviet Union versus the United States. So who's the king? And Gorbachev was the king at the time. And when did Gorbachev lose his power? It began in 1989, but he is president until 1991 when the Soviet Union was dissolved. So it receives its deadly wound and it dies in 1991 when the Soviet Union was dissolved. So I'll just read the notes because I was going to go off notes, but probably we're going to cover it. So we're going to read from the Washington Post archives an article that was written in 1991 by a representative who was there in the Soviet Union on the day it was dissolved, December 25th, 1991. He said that this is the day that the Soviet Union was dissolved. He said that Gorbachev resigned today as a president of the Soviet Union, transferring power to Boris Yeltsin, as the Soviet flag on top of the Kremlin was lowered for the last time. Within half an hour of his resignation, the flag of the Soviet had been lowered, symbolizing the end of the Soviet Union, and the white, red, and blue Russian flag was flying over Gorbachev's former residence above the Kremlin office. So at the same time exactly, Gorbachev stood down as president, symbolized in the first line as death. He surrenders all power to the Soviet, and the Soviet Union was dissolved. And it was interesting, the quote from the photographer, the previous quote, I think she meant journalist, who was at this event, and he was also in 1989 at the Berlin Wall when it fell. So the same person that had the quote in the previous slide was also in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. And he said it was strange how little reaction there was. He's talking about December 1991. When the Berlin Wall fell, everyone came onto the streets. The events of 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, were events of the same magnitude, but he says that no one seemed to care because all of the attention was on the events of 1989. Time magazine never wrote a book on 1991. So history and prophecy agree. And when prophecy speaks of history, what is marked as significant is not the death, but the deadly wound. So the deadly wound is marked, but not the death. Prophecy brushes over the history of 1799 and 1991, these two histories here. Even though you can see it, and Ellen White gives it to us. And Revelation tells us too, that there would be a deadly wound and then a death. But the focus is on the wounding, on the deadly wound. So if we treat it as a parable, we can add information that isn't readily available. And what needs to be completed on our line? What are we missing?
The
If we know that-
resurrection.
Huh?
The resurrection.
Oh, good. You're not even looking. Good. She wasn't looking, you guys.
Oh, I wasn't.
So, oh, you were looking. Okay.
But I know that.
So yeah. So we know that there's a resurrection in this lineup here. So we know that there would be a resurrection here. So the resurrection was missing. So we can know with compare and contrast. Part A, the king of the north receives a deadly wound, died, and resurrected. Part B, the king of the south receives a deadly wound, died, and was resurrected. So just with understanding the parable teaching, we can go back to the verses that were opened up in 1989 and find the message of 2016 and see that the king of the south was not finished in this history. But we have to have future battles between the king of the north and the king of the south. And that's one thing we can learn from those verses. That pattern is a deadly wound and a death and a resurrection. There's one other lesson we need to consider. We've compared and contrasted the history of the defeat of the king of the north with the history of the defeat of the king of the south. And that's one compare and contrast. But we can go into this history and make another compare and contrast. We've seen the deadly wound and the death, deadly wound and the death. We can compare and contrast the deadly wound and the death, but can we compare and contrast the history of captivity? Does the king of the south ever go into captivity? Because we saw that there was a captivity here, and that captivity marked his deadly wound, but we don't see a captivity here. So we won't find a captivity with the king of the south. You don't find a captivity as part of the story when it comes to between the king of the north and the king of the south. If you want to speak about captivity, who do you have to speak about? Who else went into captivity?
We did. Anciently.
Anciently. So we're going to do a different compare and contrast. So now we need to do a different compare and contrast. We're going to do two different compare and contrast. We're going to overlay the king of the north with the king of the south, and then we're going to compare and contrast, which is what we have done here. Now I want to leave that aside. We've looked at the deadly wound and the death, but the papacy is being punished because it led into captivity. It goes into captivity. And who did it lead into captivity? It didn't lead the king of the south into captivity. That's a different story about the king of the south. So to understand what it means by captivity, we have to compare and contrast the true king of the north with the counterfeit king of the north.
Yeah, and that's why she always explains Russia, or say Soviet Union, Russia, that whole group as its own pawn, because it's relevant in history, but it's not I don't
It's
know
not
how to
what
put it.
Satan's using.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a compare and contrast where we compared the two portions, for part A and part B. You have the king of the north and the king of the south. Compare and contrast the two and see that they both have a death or a deadly wound, a death and a resurrection, a deadly wound, a death and a resurrection. But now we're going to compare and contrast the true king of the north and the counterfeit king of the north. So what we need to compare and contrast is the history of Israel and the history of Babylon, because we understand that all Satan does is counterfeit. So when you come into the Christian dispensation in the time of Christ, you go from those old sanctuary services into a new dispensation. And now you leave behind all those types and shadows, all the sanctuary service, and moved into the Christian dispensation, which required Satan to make the same transition. And soon after his religion transfers from paganism, left behind those types and shadows and became a closer counterfeit as papalism. So Satan watches what God does with his people, and he copies it. Not exactly though, because the counterfeit does not have to be an exact replica. It cannot be of the same quality. And when Satan counterfeits, it's not of the same quality. You can see it's filled with mistakes, but they're following the same pattern. So I think we discussed it in the break, or maybe it was when we started this, but I think we discussed in the break how the difference between how it took Satan 500 years to catch up with from paganism to papalism to get to counterfeit again, right? Or to get to begin to counterfeit. And then when you get into the Reformation, it took him 100 years. So he's been behind, and now he's now they're, I don't want to say neck and neck.
Caught up.
Caught up. Thank you. So in 1798, the papacy goes into captivity. When Israel went into captivity, why was it? Why did Israel go into captivity?
Because they fell. Because they fell.
The disobedience.
Yeah, disobedience.
Disobedience to God. So when the papacy goes into captivity, compare and contrast. Why?
Disobedience to Satan.
Yeah.
So who did it to them? Compare and contrast. Israel goes into captivity because they rebelled against God. Papacy goes into captivity because they rebelled against their boss, which is Satan.
That's so interesting. You realize God didn't use Babylon. He just let Babylon come and take his people. He just stopped protecting them. And Satan doesn't use the king of the south. He just stopped protecting the papacy and let France take them and do what they wanted with them.
Mhm.
It's the same thing.
Put them in disobedience.
Yeah, they took away their protection of them. Satan took protection away from papacy, and God took protection away from his people.
Mhm.
That's it.
Quite the counterfeit. So Satan is their boss, and who is the what was the papacy's job function? They had two jobs that they were to do in the 1260 years. The first was to control the kings of Europe, and the second was to persecute God's people. So we're comparing Israel and Babylon here, and the papacy was to control the kings of Europe and to persecute God's people. Who was doing that work for them? And this becomes important when we get to the history of the Reformation. Who begins that work? And there's that word again, the Jesuits come up. It appears, if you're not paying attention, if we're not paying attention, that we're putting the Jesuits in a good light. And I have to tell you, we talked about it a few weeks ago when I watched that movie, The Two Popes. It's really interesting. It's like, wow, they are really setting up to look just like God's people. And we need to understand that. And it's the Jesuits. We know that this is the first Jesuit Pope in 900, is it 900 years? Or the first Jesuit Pope? I think I'm thinking that it's 600 years for the first, since a Pope ever resigned instead of dying. I think it's the first Jesuit Pope. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yes, that is correct.
The first Jesuit Pope, right?
Yes, and then this is the only time, the second time when the Pope resigned.
Right. And so the Jesuits were the ones that had they were the part that were to do their job. So now the Jesuits are back here to do their job. So anyway, so during the Reformation, the ones that begin to work are the Jesuits, to persecute God's people and to control the kings of Europe. So Great Controversy 306, paragraph 1. In this quote, we won't read all of it. We just want to note the last few sentences. In the last few sentences begins a 1260 days or years ended in 1798. But persecution of God's people ended 25 years previous in 1773. Why did the papacy stop persecuting in 1773 when their boss Satan has given them a job to do, control the kings and kill God's people? Why did they stop short of 1260 years? In 1773, the Pope of this time is given a choice. The kings of Europe came together and they decided they wanted the Jesuits expelled from their countries and the order abolished, the Jesuit order abolished. They wanted the Pope to abolish the Jesuit order, and they recognized that the papacy would not do this willingly, so they gave them two choices. Because the mentality behind it was that if the papacy was given two choices, they wouldn't like to say no to both of them, and that they would consent to one and reject the other. So their job function was to control the kings and to persecute God's people. And you have 1773 here, where they want to, the kings are coming and saying, we want the Jesuit order abolished. And we're going to see as we go through what the other thing was, what the choices were. So the Pope was approached with two options, two requests. One, we, the kings of Europe, request that you abolish the Jesuit order. Or two, we, the kings of Europe, ask you to give us your land and your wealth. And part of the wealth that belonged to the papacy was supposed to be divided up between the kings of Europe. So the papacy is given a choice. They can choose between their prophetic job function or between temporal prosperity. And what's their problem in 1773? They choose temporal prosperity instead of fulfilling their prophetic job function given to them by their boss, Satan. And this was apostasy, so they went into apostasy, just like God's people went into apostasy. They say no, they won't give up their wealth, but to please the kings, they abolish the Jesuit order. And as we learned from ancient Israel, when you go into apostasy against your boss, he sends you into captivity to teach you a lesson. If we compared and contrasted the papacy, the counterfeit king of the north, with the true, we can also see information that isn't there in the verses. So if this is apostasy in captivity, God's people coming out of captivity. So in 1798, the papacy goes into captivity. 1798 goes into captivity. And in 1798, God's people come out of captivity. When God's people come out of captivity, it's in the history of modern Israel. And in the history of how many histories, and in this history, how many histories do you have? In the history of modern Israel, you have two. You have an Alpha and an Omega. The Millerite history and 140, whoops, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. You have the Millerite history and the 144,000. We say there are two histories of modern Israel.
So at Sunday law, both the counterfeit and the true king of the north people are going to be, or the king of the north is going to be not in captivity. Because we're going to be on the right side of our issue and the papacy is going to be on the right side of their issue.
So,
and that's where the craziness happens.
Right. And this 25 belongs over here. Not sure how I did that, but this 25 belongs here because there's 25 years here. I was thinking it was the page number.
Oh.
But it didn't get moved properly. So let's see. So two histories. We take the history of the Millerites and the history of the 144,000. We say there are two histories in modern Israel, an Alpha and an Omega. And it begins with the coming out of captivity. So compare and contrast modern Israel and modern Babylon. Modern Babylon exists in how many histories? They went into captivity. When they come out after 1798, how many histories will you find modern Babylon in? Two, an Alpha and an Omega. So you're going to have the same thing where you're going to have an Alpha and an Omega of modern Babylon. And they too come out of captivity. So just based on the structure, you can see modern Israel and modern Babylon. Modern Israel comes in two histories of an Alpha and Omega, so modern Babylon must come in two histories, an Alpha and an Omega. And what brought God's people out of captivity? Three angels' messages. So you have the three angels' messages that brings them out of captivity. Compare and contrast, you're going to have messages that are going to bring modern Babylon out of captivity. So a three-step prophetic testing message, 1818, is the message of William Miller. We discussed that earlier. That came up, and he gets his concordance in 1798. 1816 to 1818, he's studying, and he understands the message. That's increase of knowledge and the formalization of the message. So what brings the papacy out of captivity? You need a 3-step prophetic testing message. When did they get their 3-step prophetic testing message?
Isn't that what Fama or what the three kids?
Fatima.
Yeah, Fatima.
Yep. So in 1917, the messages of Fatima. And if that message of Fatima comes in 3 parts, something, or Satan impersonating Mary, visits these 3 children at Fatima in Portugal and gives them a 3-step message. The first one is a vision of hell. They see this vision where the Catholic idea of hell is presented before them. They see a bottomless pit, all of these people burning for eternity. So they see the Catholic vision of hell, and they're children. So they're children and they're young, they're 6, 7, and 9 years old. So the first message that they get is fear. What's the first angel's message?
Fear God.
Fear God. So who are they told to fear?
Fear Satan.
Yeah. Well, they don't know it that way, but so they're given a vision of hell. They're being shown that God is going to destroy them and let them burn in hell for all eternity.
Oh, there's a fear God too then. Fear your God.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is the third? So we did the first. The first is fear. And they have a vision of judgment in the third, they have a vision of judgment, and what they see is all of the papal church, first the Pope, then all the bishops and cardinals, then all the lay people are being led through this town, and this town is full of people who are dead. They go up this mountain, one by one, they are slaughtered. The Pope is killed, the people are killed. It's a message of judgment. The second message gives the purpose or point to the whole story. It's the point of the messages of Fatima. It's a message to dedicate Russia. The message is to defeat the King of the South. So the 3 messages of Fatima counterfeit the 3 angels' messages. Fear Satan, give him glory because judgment is coming. How do you give Satan glory? His people, his church in apostasy, and he is calling them back to their job function. And before he gets to us, what's their job function? They have to defeat the King of the South. So the 3 messages that they receive are the 3 messages of Fatima. Fear, and you need to defeat the King of the South. The judgment is coming.
So if they don't fear the king, if they don't,
They didn't do their job function.
yeah, and then that's where that fear comes from, right? I mean that
Because judgment's
ultimately-
going to
yeah,
come.
exactly.
Yeah,
Because they didn't glorify him and do what he told them to do.
right.
Wow.
Quite counterfeit.
Exactly.
So, and why are they being told this in 1917? What's happening in 1917 in Russia? It's the Russian Revolution. These visions of Fatima are given a few months before the Bolsheviks ended that revolution. But Satan can already see that Russia is transitioning, and he can see what he saw in France. Lenin is about to take power. It's about to become communist. And in the middle of the Russian Revolution, he gives his church a message, a counterfeit of the 3 angels' messages. If we went to the Millerite history, we saw the 3 angels' messages. Were those 3 angels' messages meant to be put into some type of time capsule and kept for over 2,000 years, for the year 2000, and something for us to open up and understand? Or did they have direct meaning for their time? The 3 angels' message is given in the Millerite history and is given to the Millerites. We have a direct connection to them. But what they were for their own history. I'm sorry, I got that one backwards.
But what were they for their
Own history. Thank you. Okay. So the 3 messages of Fatima are they for some type of war between Russia and the United States, or were they to be utilized in the history of 1917? The message William Miller was given was relevant to their history to play out in the 46 years that ended in disappointment and failure. The three messages of Fatima were for this time period. Our history is connected, but the counterfeit three angels messages of 1917 was specifically for this history 1917, which means it must have a beginning and an end and a war between the king of the north and the king of the south. And where is there a war between the king of the north and the king of the south in this history? World War II, Hitler and Stalin. And who sided with Hitler? Pope Pius XII. Why did Pope Pius XII ally himself with Hitler in World War II? Because Pope Pius XII was the first pope that accepted the messages of Fatima. And he recognized that in his generation, not a future generation, he had to attempt to defeat the king of the south. So when we look at World War II, we say it's an alpha history in the war of the king of the north and the king of the south. We mean that quite literally. It's not just an interesting history that has a pattern for our day. It's the alpha of modern Babylon. They are given the messages of Fatima, and they attempt to fulfill the Second World War. When we come to Millerite history, Ellen White will tell us that this is the history of the first and second angel's message. Here we are in the Millerite history. Then she'll say October 22nd, the third began, and it's going to travel through history until its empowerment. So we already saw from what we were reading earlier that you have the Millerite history from 1798 to October 22nd. She gives us and tells us that the first angel arrives here. Then we know that later we have the second angel arriving, and then she lets us know that on October 22nd, the third angel arrives. And the third angel goes all the way through history to our time. The history we're going to discuss in our next class, we're wanting to make a specific point that is separate to just understanding the counterfeit. So we're not going to go into the detail, but we can do that at a later time. But what I want to say, we have the Millerite history, the alpha of modern Israel, and we have the alpha of modern Babylon, which is the history of the First and Second World War. The third begins the Cold War in 1945. So you have the First and Second War, and you have the third that begins in 1945 and continues on through history until it's empowered. This isn't the only way we draw out the three angels' messages, but it is the way Ellen White describes them. And the counterfeit matches because the first attempt of modern Babylon was done in history of two world wars that ended in disappointment. So we see a disappointment here, and they ended in disappointment as well, and failure. In this history, 1798 to 1844, you have William Miller beginning in 1798 to be raised up. And we talked about that earlier, that the first angel arrives, the messenger is there, and then there's going to be an increase in knowledge. So the first angel's message arrives there, and William Miller is being raised up. So Lucia is a prophet for the papal church from the history of World War I all the way to 2005 when she dies. She was having visions and dreams that told the whole time period, who is Lucia a counterfeit of? She's a counterfeit of Ellen White. So you have Miller here, you have Pius, we already discussed them. Now we have Ellen White and Lucia. You have Lucia and Ellen White. So when we talk about Lucia, she's not the counterfeit of William Miller, because he was raised up in 1798 and became the leader in his time period, who's the counterfeit of William Miller, and that's Pope Pius. And he's raised up in 1899, and he has an increase of knowledge. So when we look at modern Israel, you compare and contrast with modern Babylon. Is everybody following okay?
Yeah, where is Ellen G. White again? I know that that's not countering, but like, what is what's my question? Well, because on the period you can have so many prophets, you know what I'm saying? But I'm just saying that she's in that history, but where I know she's not lining up with William Miller and Pope Pius, but I'm just saying.
Right, because they came in 1798.
Right. And
She was there a little bit before 1844. I want to say 1843.
She was born in
1842.
1827.
Yeah, but I'm talking about when she came in and she was converted by William Miller's preaching.
Yeah, that had to happen. She was
She was-
18. She was about 16, 18, right?
I was thinking 13 or 14, but maybe somebody remembers more specifically. She was young.
Yeah, I know
She was
she was young, but
And so both of these histories, remember, are noted as being an alpha history. The alpha of modern Israel, Millerite history, and the alpha of modern Babylon. And that's the history of World War I and World War II here. So you have the three angels' messages that begin in 1798. The first angel arrives. You have the second angel that arrives. And we're not marking when it arrives. We're just marking that it comes, it follows. And then we're marking that the third angel arrives and continues on through history. And in the history of the alpha of modern Babylon, you have Pope Pius is raised up at 1899. I'm sorry, I didn't put that on there, it's up here. But 1899, Pope Pius XII is raised up. And so you have the arrival here of a messenger, like you have the arrival here of a messenger. Then you have the wars that begin. You have the first war, and then you have the second war, and then the third war being marked, it begins as the Cold War that begins in 1945 and it continues through history. It's a lot of history to juggle in our heads. And then you have Ellen White and Lucia the counterfeit of Ellen White. So we'll summarize.
Luther, the counterfeit of Ellen G. White.
Lucia.
Oh, Lucia. Okay.
Lucia is the counterfeit of Ellen White. So we went to Daniel 11:40 and we made one compare and contrast, part A and part B of the verse. And we saw that the papacy received a deadly wound and died, and it was resurrected. Then the king of the south had to receive the deadly wound in 1989. Progressively, it fell until it ended in 1991. And therefore, using the rules of parables, had to also resurrect. And that's why we have the king of the south in our history again. Then we took this theme of captivity. We can't take captivity to the king of the south. They have no boss to rebel against. We have to take it back to Israel and compare and contrast modern Israel with modern Babylon. So modern Israel came out of captivity in 1798 when the three angels' messages were given. They had an increase of knowledge and a new leadership was raised up. But they come in two histories, an alpha and an omega. Modern Babylon went into captivity in 1798, which means they must come out in an alpha history. So if modern Israel comes out of captivity in the alpha history, then modern Babylon comes out in an alpha history. So modern Babylon went into captivity in 1798, which means they must come out in an alpha history where they are given three counterfeit messages and a new leadership is raised up and a prophet having dreams and visions, but it's going to end in disappointment and failure and return to our time period. We see the history of the first and second angel's message that did a work of God's people. And we see the history of World War I and World War II, beginning with the third that runs through history, and from 1945, what we've already discussed, the war between the king of the north and the king of the south. Is everybody following that? I think that might be the last slide, but I'll click here forward. But everybody follow that okay? We see all the parallels of the two histories, comparing and contrasting. First, you compare and contrast the king of the north and the king of the south and see that there's a deadly wound, a death, and a resurrection. So each one of them experienced that. So you, by one doing it, you know the other does the same. Then you compare, you can't compare captivity with the king of the south because the king of the south has no boss to put him in captivity. But you compare and contrast modern Israel, modern Babylon, and you see that each went into captivity because they rebelled against their boss. God's people rebelled against God, and then the Babylon rebelled against Satan. So they didn't perform their job function, they went into captivity. So modern Israel comes out of captivity in 1798 in an alpha history. of because there's going to be two histories, and there was not supposed to be two histories. We know that now, but we are here now, and we understand the two histories, the application to have the two histories. So it's an alpha history, and it ends in disappointment and failure. So then you have modern Babylon that now is coming out of captivity as well, 1899, and it's going to have its three angels messages, going to have also a new leadership put up, and then also a prophet put in place. So, any questions?
So just to clarify, the new leadership was Pope Pius XII.
Yes.
Okay, and then the prophet raised up for Babylon is Lucia,
Right.
just like and for the Millerites is Ellen G. White, and what was that last clarification? Oh, and we have the three-step testing prophet, three-step testing message, and they have a three-step testing message.
Right. Well, we kind of breezed through that a little early, so we have time before lunch. Open up, let's have some discussion, questions. Anybody?
Was there ever a date given for the resurrection of the papacy, the king of the south and king of the north?
The resurrection of the papacy.
Yeah, because we know
Yeah,
it's supposed they both resurrected.
Yeah,
So do we-
1889. When they're resurrected and they get they come out of captivity. Am I marking the
18
right thing? If I mark, it's 1899 though. I'm trying to find it because it was on one of the slides here, right here, 1899. Pope Pius XII. He's raised up in 1899, and there's an increase of knowledge.
Okay.
So what we do know then, go ahead, somebody have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. Back,
Oh, wait, hang on. So Francis, when he was raised up, that was the resurrection of them in our time.
I think so.
I always wondered that. Cool, thanks.
Go ahead, somebody had a question?
Robert.
yeah, I have a question. Back on slide 8 or 7, I think it was,
7?
about the battle, the war between France and the Papal Army. Who was the Papal Army at that time?
I don't know. It just said papal troops. We could probably Wikipedia that one.
Yeah, the French army and the Papal Army fight in an actual battle.
In an actual battle.
Yeah,
Yeah, they had
Yeah, because
because
they did have an army. I knew that.
they were relegated to just Rome. So they used to have all Italy, but France slowly kept taking that away. And then the Papal Army, they killed one of Napoleon's generals. And so he's like, all right, we're done. Because they had a treaty for a little bit, but
And
then
that was what brought him in to take the book
it's not
captive,
their
right?
army. The Papal Army didn't kill them, but he died in there somehow for some reason because of some riots that were happening.
I vaguely remember it.
Yeah, and then Napoleon said, all right, that's over. We're not doing this anymore. You don't even get Rome anymore. But
so who consisted of the Papal Army though? The papacy had its own army?
remember how
It was in Italy, the whole country.
it wasn't just the church in the 1260, remember? They had the Jesuits were part of that army back in the day.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then
okay, a different country. All right.
Yeah, it was during the 1260s, so they still had control of the countries around them and their military.
Yeah, I understand.
But
Okay.
specifically right now in the Vatican, they have something called the Swiss Guard, which is for some reason people from Switzerland, but they joined the Swiss Guard and they're actually the police officers and the army of the Vatican right now. They're trained, they have weapons, they have everything they need.
So here's a papal military. Historically, the papal states maintained military forces composed of volunteers and mercenaries. Between 1860 and 1870, the papal army, Pontificio in Italian, okay, comprised 2 regiments of locally recruited Italian infantry, 2 Swiss regiments, and a battalion of Irish volunteers, plus artillery and dragoons. In 1861, an international Catholic volunteer corps called Papal Zubaz, after a kind of French colonial native Algerian infantry, and imitating their uniform type was created. Predominantly made up of Dutch, French, and Belgian volunteers, this corps saw service against Garibaldi's red shirts, Italian patriots, and finally the forces of the newly united Italy. The Papal Army was disbanded in 1870, leaving only the Palatine Guard, which was itself disbanded on the 14th of September 1970. But that didn't take us all the way back to, do I have that right?
Yeah, it only started in the 1800s. Didn't talk about the 1700s
Yeah,
Papal
because,
Army.
yeah, I got two histories in my head at the same time. So it'd have to be the army with the French army, that battled against the French army in 1799,
Yeah.
or prior to. So, did that somewhat help? For its first 300 years, the Catholic Church was persecuted and unrecognized, unable to hold or transfer property. Early congregations met in rooms set aside for that purpose. Trying to find where we find the army, where they begin. I don't want to read all that. We don't think we need all
Because
this.
the papacy, the Pope, was church and state. It wasn't only church.
Right.
So they had the army and they have everything organized as any other state. So they had the army.
Right.
They were doing all these crusades all around Europe and killing people.
And that's what, yeah, true. And then that's what is being pointed out too, that the statue.
But that was the Jesuits. That's what the whole point is the Jesuits stopped doing their job. They stopped their persecution work. That's why they went into captivity.
Right.
So the Jesuits were disbanded, but I'm sure they had, again, coalitions of volunteers who believed in the faith.
Okay, I'm scrolling through this to try, Napoleonic era, here we come. The greatest extent, the 18th century, the Papal States included most of central Italy. The French Revolution affected the temporal territories of the papacy as well as the Roman Church in general. In 1791, revolutionary France annexed Comtat Venetian and Avignon.
Avignon.
Later, the French invasion of Italy in 1796. The legations, the Papal States' northern territories were seized and became part of the Cisalpine Republic. 2 years later, French forces invaded the remaining area of the Papal States, and General Louis Alexander Berthier declared a Roman Republic, February 1798. Pope Pius VI fled to Siena and died in exile in Valence, France. And that's a Wikipedia site, so.
But no Papal Army.
No Papal Army, yeah. Papal Army, Papal States. So. Anybody else?
Thank you, Lane. That was a good one.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
I'm still sharing screen, right? Okay. So we can just go here if we needed a quick review of anything, because we do have a few minutes. So we don't stop till 1:30, right?
Well, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Right now I'm studying the vowels, and I was just wondering if, since you did those vowels, if anything has changed.
No.
Really quick.
Go ahead.
So it says the Papal Army was the loosely constructed army of volunteers and mercenaries in the service of the Italian Papal States, active from 8th century all the way until the capture of Rome by Italy in the 1870s.
Yeah.
So it's that same.
We just read the tail end of it, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to there's some study that goes into that pertaining to 21 and 24. Was it 21 and 24? pertain, and those are things that Elder Parmenter does explain, that there were differences, and that was something that came up in that message that we read earlier, that there were differences that came up, and also with the nature of man, the vows on the nature of man. Not that they're wrong, but people are wanting to get rid of certain vows and say that they're not valid, but particularly though pertaining to 9/11. And you have to watch the presentations probably more than once. I know I have. But to understand when it comes to the breakdown of the vows, of those particular vows and how they relate to 9/11. And I'm pretty sure, because I'm going to start working on one of the presentations in Germany to do probably in March. And it's there for anybody to watch it for now anyways, but I'm going to put together the notes and the slideshow for it on when did the third angel arrive. And because many of us have probably heard, but I started catching that, hey, he's saying that the third angel arrived at 9/11. The second and the third angel both arrived at 9/11. And I was like, when did that happen? What did I miss?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going back to reviewing some of those presentations, because that's where he was showing a lot of that, but he also says he's been showing it for months. But there was something that, because he did lay out what we had known in the past, or seen in the past and understood, is that the third angel arrives in 2014. So I just encourage us to watch those videos to try to get a better understanding, and I'll be working on the notes, hope prayerfully to have done in March. So did the vows change? No. But he describes them as being carefully written because there was a conflict. And so you have to watch presentations to get that. I'm not able to describe it out as well as it should be. It's better to watch him until I go for myself. It helps me to go through the presentations.
There was also a lady in the Australia group. They posted on Australia admin. Someone summarized the vows, the 2 vows that were the issue. They did a summary on that. So,
well, maybe you can grab that document and send it to me if you.
It's not a document. It's a video.
Oh, it's a video.
Yeah, they posted it on admin Australia.
Oh, okay.
Then
we can send it out to somebody.
Yeah.
But I think that was Sister Anna. Was that you, Anna?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay. Then we can find it. I can show you how to find that website. Or if you're what do you call it, savvy with finding YouTube channels. Otherwise, we can email it out to you. But it's Admin Australia Prophecy School.
Admin Australia Proxy School.
Yeah, if you go to YouTube, and in the YouTube search bar, if you put admin, looks like she's going to pull it up. Admin Prophecy School.
Or somebody can just copy and paste the.
I'm on share screen. So you have to share screen.
I'm just gonna put it in the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you could just put it in the chat, just the ULR to it. That would
There it is.
There you go.
Catherine Harding. I don't know who she is, but review of vows 21 and 24.
So these are good to go through.
I didn't have it.
If you
It's in the chat. It says from Adriana to everyone.
Just now popped up. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
So these are good to go to review. This was also, this chart up here was the one that Finn did, Future is Now in Germany, put together. And then this short video here, Brother Victor did, which was I really loved what he did with this. But you can play this little video. It's only like 5 minutes, but what it does is it's this here, what he created, and put it into a slideshow where he pulls up these bullet points and goes through in the 5-minute video, just goes through and pulls up each one of these sections, and I want to say teaches it. I don't know how to put the word into it, but I mean, it's a really good presentation to learn from, and you can pause it, because that's what you would want to do, is pause it when you're at a section and then go through and read the quote, or read that section and then go to the next one and pause it. And it'll walk you through the history of the Midnight Cry. And then when you get down here, you're going to start going through some of the individual steps of the midnight cry. Well, beginning at Acts 27, which is where we begin here, Acts 27, where she began in Acts 27. And then, because Acts 27 is needful to understand, to build on all the rest. And then the Diadochi Wars, and how we arrived at the Diadochi Wars, and then the history of Pyrrhus. So, but they just play like a regular slideshow in here. You just can go through them like that. So, and then the rest of them, the rest of the notes, if you go to the Sacramental Fellowship page, you have, this is where we're posting all the Guadalupe presentations. And it's also where we posted the Germany camp meeting notes that everybody did. And then also, here's the Brazil School of Prophets, all of them. So a lot of stuff to study from, a lot of materials, plus all the other places out there. Plus I have at the top of this link, the webpage that Adriana set up as well, where she posts all the notes for all the Monday and Wednesday night stuff, because I'm only basically posting what we do on Sabbath. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you for doing all this. Sure appreciate it.
No problem. No problem. And it's a group effort. I think your notes are posted somewhere too. So I do also have, if you just click where it says Bible studies, it's going to take you to this page that has our information for our Bible study, but we have the schedule posted. I have one update that I have to make. I think it's this one right here. Other than that, the schedule is pretty current. It's just this one date that still needs to be changed. And Jackie, we still have you tentatively here. Is that correct? Is she still with us?
Sister Elaine, thank you. I really enjoyed this study. A lot of material here. Yes, I'm getting a feedback.
She's talking to us from the other side.
Do you have two mics on?
Well, let me explain.
You've got two devices on, Jackie. That's why they're the echo.
I have my computer on and my phone.
Yeah, you have to turn the mic off on and the volume down on one of them.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think you got it.
You got to change that Adriana to a mom.
I know. I can't do that here. So now we can't hear you, Jackie. Is it the same presentation?
No, she's doing something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brazil.
I have to figure this out. I just put the Zoom on my computer. So I've been, that was new for me. So everything is much different now than just from my phone. But I was just hanging on to my phone because in case there was a glitch, I didn't miss anything. So,
Okay.
I've had my phone and my computer going at the same time.
Does your computer have a mic though?
Yes, it does.
You could just disconnect or leave the meeting on your phone and just stay online with the one on your computer.
Yeah, I have to find that. I mean, this is new to me, like I said, so I don't see it, but it's probably right here. It says start video, unmute.
Are you on you mean the computer or the phone? You can get off the phone. You know how to get off the phone, right? Just leave the meeting.
Yes.
Do it off, and then just stay connected with us on the computer.
Well, let me see. Okay. Meeting.
But she did it again, if she can still talk to us, though.
Okay.
There you
There you
go.
go.
I'm unmuted now. All right, yes, I got rid of the phone. So I do see this on Friday, the 20th of March. Is that, yeah, pretty small print. I'm just trying to read it here. Yeah, this is something that somebody might have to walk me through. Now that I can do this actually on my computer, that I'd be ready to do it, on that date with
Uh,
that study and how that's going to look.
We also have, and I think we've already gone over this just to, for anybody else, that there's tutorials that we made. I should have put titles, but you can click on either one of them and it'll take you to
Oh, yes, I did see those.
the tutorials that help you know how to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and it'll take you, I think if you go to here, it'll take you to Adriana's website where the other notes are, and she has some other tutorials, I believe, posted there. So, so all these different tutorials of how to get started. And then we'll help you too.
Yes, good.
So
I will
somebody
take a look at
somebody that
that.
wants to partner with her and give her some help, that would be great.
Yeah, that I'd appreciate, just to get the practice.
Yeah. And it has really benefited us to go through and do it this way and present it. For one, we get the practice teaching, and we know for those that are already through, is it Uganda? No, it wasn't Uganda. It was one of those ones in Africa where he did Deborah and jail, and showing that there'll be women that are finishing the work and doing the man's work of warrior. So what that means, we have to study out and all that, but
Preacher, we're gonna be preachers.
yeah,
Women ordination, that's the thing. Because in our
Yeah.
time, spiritual warriors are just,
yeah.
so that's what it is.
So teaching it, going through the process of creating the notes and then presenting it, it helps solidify some of these things in our minds. And there's many points to pick up, but we have this time. It's not a lot of time, and yet it is time, and we should be maximizing our time and learning what we need to be doing. And if we're fearful, like Sister Victoria was saying earlier, a little bit of anxiety and fearful about not understanding everything, God is gonna work it out, huh?
Not about understanding everything.
Yeah, what'd you say? Correct me.
About
Watching
the responsibility.
Yeah,
of just
yeah.
being the woman being
Right, and not, yeah,
and not failing. Like
right.
keeping.
Sorry, I apologize. Thank you. So,
I'm awake.
so good to know. So God can help us catch up if we are doing our diligent effort. Because if he brought us in here, and I tell people this often, that he didn't call us because we can, he called us because we can't. And so if we have faith in him and we trust him and we're doing our own due diligent study, he will help us. So like we were saying earlier, we find places to listen wherever we're at. We're exercising, we're walking, we're giving up this, we're giving up that. And, we all work, we all have jobs, so we do everything we can, or I think most of us anyways work, and we do everything we can to learn in between. I have videos that I listen to in the car and anywhere else. So
Can I say something?
Mhm.
Bluetooth. Oh, there's a tip too. So Bluetooth has become one of my best friends. Like technology is like the bomb.com in our generation. So you have Bluetooth. Yeah, I have this shower thingy. I found it at Marshall's, and they have them like at thrift shops, or not so much at thrift shop, but like mostly at like Marshalls and things like that, TJ Maxx, all those different kind of stores. And they're like these shower Bluetooth things, and you can stick it up in your shower or your or in your bathroom on the mirror. And so you can play on your phone or even on your computer and just listen to videos or watch videos in the bathroom, while you're getting ready. Or I also have a Bluetooth speaker, and I use that thing. I'm just traveling all around the house. Wherever I go, I have that speaker going. So I'm not necessarily right there by the computer or whatever. I'm like, I can take that traveling, and then it's a speaker too, so I can put it up loud, because sometimes washing dishes or doing other things, it gets too loud. It's a speaker, so I just cut that thing up like to the highest volume or whatever. And I forgot my other point, but yeah, that Bluetooth has become and then in the car, so then you can listen to it in the car. And then they have these like car things that, of course, we can't watch, be on our phones. while driving or whatever, but they have these hands-off devices, so you can stick it in your car and it holds up your cell phone. So like, yeah, you can even play it, you know, in your car and stuff. So it's pretty cool.
So
Yeah, I'd like to make two comments.
sure.
And just what Sister Victoria was saying, Bluetooth and YouTube have now become two of my real good friends.
Praise the Lord. You have grown a
Yeah,
lot.
Yeah, and that's just been a real blessing, those two things. And the other comment is for all the ladies out there, all the sisters out there, for lack of better word, I'm going to use the word slam. But there's for all the sisters out there, should watch the, I'm not sure it's Uganda or Sudan, just very recent, where videos where Elder Parminder slams Future for America for the culture of oppressing women.
Yeah, we've seen it.
That's South Sudan, and that's when he's going through the studies of Deborah and Jael and Barak.
Yeah, I thought that was really good and really encouraging for the ladies out there.
Because, thank you, because think about it, because it was the women that were supposed to be being made ready, and the first messenger suppressed the second messenger. And I did present Parminder, but I don't have time to do the study, but it's something that I know is relevant. In I want to say 2 Samuel somewhere. Right now I don't remember what chapter it was. It might have been 2 Samuel. I can't remember. But we all know the story of David, and it's in Chronicles as well. We know the story of between David and Saul when Saul's trying to kill David, and David had the opportunity twice to kill Saul, and he never did. He said, "I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed." He trusted the Lord to take care of it. So that's some sort of understanding for anybody that's new, is to spiritually what's been happening. So why would Parminder put out the vows worded in a way that, you know, that brought about some of the where they had to be clarified? He wrote the vows in a very special way, and then it was all okay to write it the way that he did. So that if you think about it, the Bible itself is written in ways that you have to understand parables, right? At this stage, we have to understand parables. So to me, they were just more evidence of the Holy Spirit is really leading this movement. But I wanted to point out too, that though we know our test is, you know, racism, sexism, and homophobia, and we have all these different things that we're learning and understanding, one thing that I know I pick up through my studies is that we're being tested. Do we really love the Lord? Do we really love the Lord? So we kind of touched on some of this earlier, that when we come up to certain points, like for instance, who is our neighbor? For those that watch those presentations, do we love our neighbor? Do we love one another? Would we wash one another's feet? Jesus washed Judas's feet right up at the end. Jesus never turned away Judas. Judas left. Judas came to a point where it's, do you love me or don't you? And it's the work of the Lord and the Holy Spirit on our hearts that brings us to those points. So as we continue to learn and study, know that if we're looking at restoration, right? Restoration, what does the word restoration mean? It's to restore something, right? So if you're going to restore something, it has to be something that it once was, that it's being restored to. So if he's going to restore Eden, then the way to understand, if you're anybody struggling with, well, what do I do here? What do I do there? Do I give up this? What am I supposed to give up? All these other things. Go to Eden and look at Eden and look at how it was in Eden, because that's the restoration. That's the goal. And if it seems ever too hard, remember that God has an answer for that too, that nothing's too hard for the Lord, right? He that began this great work in us will complete it unto Christ Jesus. But ultimately, each one of these crossroad points that he brings us to
You know what? Oh, sorry, not to.
no. So he brings us to these points to test us. And I know he's brought me to the several pivotal points, and I'm sure everybody else has testimony for their own selves. And it's like I've said for a long time, why come this far to let anything stand in the way? And I know I've heard Adriana say it too. What's the point? Why come this far and let some cherished whatever, because that cherished whatever would be our eternal destruction.
Yeah.
Were you gonna say something?
Yeah. I'll keep talking.
I'm done.
Now my thoughts come. But because that point led me to another point where someone told me a long time ago, it was in 2011 when I went on that retreat, and that's where it was so interesting because in that retreat, that's where I first learned about the 25-20. But I didn't go into deep study, but that was where it first revealed to my mind, you know, and I didn't hear anything after that. And it was interesting because I remember it was with Present Truth Ministries. It was with Stephen D. Lewis and his ministry. They went over there, and he said that those who want to be a part of the, you know, it's gonna pour out. And I kept remembering, like, what? And I went there, and there was so much going on, and I felt like, how is this preparing me for the 144,000? And God revealed to me, like, most recently, that it was through you, that awakening, that seed planting of that, the 25-20 being revealed to you, that even led into you being it. But anyway, that's just a whole different thing. But the lady at that retreat, a woman told me, she said, don't let someone take your crown. And ever since she said that, I can't remember specifically what we were talking about, but she said, don't let no one take your crown. And ever since that point, that always stuck on my mind. Don't let someone take your crown, you know, and that had every, you know, place I've been through, you know, and difficulty or whatever, you know, that came to my mind as a strengthening kind of quote or, you know, motivation, like, don't let someone steal your crown. Don't let this be the thing that takes, you know, what God wants you to have, you know. And but that kind of threw me off. So I can't remember my first point, but yeah.
So, Sister Anna, one place you could go, and if anybody remembers, I struggled to find them, and I know it's on the French YouTube channel page, but do you guys remember the Noumea, Hugh Caldoni? Is that how you say it, Hugh Caldoni? Presentations on parables, Parmenter. Those are really good study on understanding parables. Kind of, I don't want to say basic, but they're complicated too. But they were very good studies. So if anybody remembers where to find those and wants to post it in the chat so she can pull it out and copy and paste it.
Oh, thank you. That reminds me of my other thought, and sorry if I'm a chatter, but sin. It's recognizing what sin is. I think when we come to the point, along what you were saying earlier, is that when we come to recognize what sin is, that is what changes us. And do we want to continue in sin or don't we? When we realize something is, when we come to hate sin, that is kind of key in our experience. When we learn that this is against God, do you want to continue in that thing or do you want to let it go? It's when you come to really hate sin that you begin to overcome, that you have this dislike for sin, that you don't want to do it anymore. And I really think that also goes into, you know, the nature of man study, because we all have a lot of bad habits. And habit, I remember the Lord impressed upon my mind, that is, once you learn how to replace those bad habits with good ones, and you continue in that good habit, it becomes your nature, you know, it becomes you. So you don't continue in that bad habit. It's now replaced with a good one, and that becomes your new nature. So it's really interesting.
So we'll wrap it up here. If anybody has anything they want to say before we break for lunch. No? Sister Lana, would you like to pray? See if her mic goes off. If not, I'm going to call Brother Henry. Brother Henry, would you like to pray?
Sure.
And pray for the food as well?
And the person we're supposed to pray for
And
the
the
message.
person that's going to it's being raised up to give the nature of man study.
Yeah. Our dear precious Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for the study time that you still continue to present us with, where we can ever learn from you, and you're also helping us to be faithful in becoming teachers. And I pray, Lord, that our ears will be ever open to continually being educated so that we can share this with others. We pray, Lord, for the messages that are still to be presented, whether it be on the nature of man or whether it be any other topics. I know that we all still have much more to learn. And we just pray that you will continue to also bless the Sabbath and that we will not lose sight of you. We ask also that you will bless the food that is soon to be partaken of, and that you will give us the life, the health, and the strength that we need through it, and that we realize that everything comes from you. Thanking you for every blessing and for hearing and answering our prayers in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So we'll be back at 2:30, right? Yes, I think it's 2:30.
Okay.
We'll be back at 2:30. And I think we're continuing Hosea. Did you stop your recording?
No, now I will.